I'm so glad that as a church we continue to learn more spiritual practices, kind of like a rule of life, although it's not rules, right? You always say this is not a rule. This is a rule of life, but in a totally different way. Thanks for teaching us about prayer. And you would think that prayer is something that we are, if you're Christian, then of course you know how to pray already, but we don't. So I'm really glad that we get to talk about that. Did you choose this subject for yourself?
Yeah.
How has prayer been part of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the church and in a strong Christian family, and intercessory prayer was a common thing I experienced in my church and with my parents and my grandparents, and so I've had seasons of like familiarity with it and belief in the power of it, and then I've had seasons where I'm like, what's the point? Right? Does it even make a difference?
Yeah.
Why does it feel so, mundane, right? Praying but I think that's natural. I think like most things in spiritual practices, there's seasons where it changes, and we kind of have to push through that and continue to pursue it and meet God at a deeper level.
You mentioned kind of like a stone of remembrance where you took us back to how God answered prayer for you as a kid.
Yeah.
Have there been more, if you look back, are there more of those piles of stones or these remembrances? Do you have any other ones that you can?
I mean, I think on one hand, at least for me, when I think of intercessory prayer, and I grew up in a Pentecostal charismatic, so the gifts of the Spirit and miraculous healing were like pursued, and so I think sometimes when I think of intercessory prayer, I think of these big things, right? It's Peter being saved from execution, and it's a physical, ailment or disease. It's cancer being cured. It's this thing, right? And although that is true, I also think intercessory prayer happens in so many small ways, right? Like there's ways where I remember in college, there was a friend of mine who was like, what's something I can be praying, with you for right now? And I was like, I'm super poor and I need a haircut and I can't afford one, right? And so we just prayed. And then like a few days later, there was some random person at school who like used to be a beautician and was like, I could cut your hair. And I'm like, okay, sure. And she did a great job. It was wonderful. Not a bad haircut. But like that seems petty.
That's what you're saying. Yeah, it's grown out.
I mean, I've had this whole hair, my whole life. How hard is it to, trim a couple inches off? But that's like seemingly insignificant, but again, it's a way of just seeing. I think sometimes we feel bad for bothering God about things that feel small or insignificant, but that's part of the goodness of who God is even what seems insignificant to us, or God, you've got bigger problems to deal with. He has an abundance, an endless supply of time and presence and attentiveness to us. And so we just have to ask.
Definitely one part of some of the tension that I feel, because you're joined here by all sorts of humans. And you're the expert here, maybe also human, we're not sure yet, but you're an expert on the field, at least, through this message. There's a good level of skepticism amongst all of us that I fight myself, that you fight, where you go, was this an answer to prayer, or was it just the right medicine at the right time? Is it just, how do you fight through that to allow God to be God and to show up in a really cool, miraculous, supernatural way, and just explaining it away and going, well, #science.
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, faith is just that. It requires faith. So if you're looking for this clear cut, this dot connects to that dot, and therefore that, right? Like you'll never find that with most things, right? So there has to be an openness to embrace the mystery, right, of prayer. Otherwise, you'll be left feeling disappointed constantly because you're just not going to get those clear of connections all the time. But there's been times where I've experienced it. I have, like I've seen, and things like with the. How do you explain, right, with me being healed as a kid, how do you explain months and months and months and months of nothing happening, and then this prayer, and within that, right, like you can't. And so there's this resignation of like, okay, God, you did something, and I don't understand, and I don't always get it, but you did something, and so unless we're willing to, like, we can't pick and choose when that applies, right? So like, that's where the faith comes to say, okay, I've seen this true, and I've experienced it. And so even in these moments where it doesn't feel true, and these times where it doesn't feel like it's making a difference, and this feels pointless, and why, like, I'm going to still enter into it because I'm trusting who God is, right? It's a relational component. And so it's not a mental thing I understand and therefore I do. It's who I'm putting my trust in, and that's
but that's a little hard for some people. I'm assuming that right now there are people looking at you who clicked here because they saw the subject, they saw what you're going to talk about, and there's a hope that perhaps, just maybe, God answers prayer. Wouldn't you take one last shot at talking to them directly and saying, this is what I want you to hang on to. This is what I've learned. This is what you can trust. This is who you can trust. Do you have words for them?
Yeah. I think when we're kids, when we're young, we have no problem trusting, right? If anything, we trust too much sometimes, right? Like my boys are little boys, and so they trust me because of who I am. They don't need understanding always in order for that trust to be there. And I think when we grow up, we lose that. We think, I can only trust if I understand, right? And that's just not the case really with anything, right? Like our relationship with God is just that. It's a relationship. And prayer is one way we engage and experience in that relationship. And anytime there's depth of love and vulnerability, there's always potential for pain, right? Like Garrett is the person who can love me most deeply in life, but he's also the person who could hurt me the most. And that's just a reality because I've chosen to love. I've chosen to pursue vulnerability and intimacy. And when we pursue God in that way, there is this potential to have disappointment, to have unanswered prayers, to have moments where you feel hurt or frustrated or unheard or why is God silent? Like that's a part of life. I would say that's a part of life, whether God's in the equation or not. And so to me, I find hope in trusting God, this being beyond myself, beyond my suffering, who's present with me in it and can meet me in it. And sometimes I'll see him move in supernatural, evident ways. Most of the time, it's in small ways. And then there'll be times when I don't see it, or when what I asked for is not as clear or as evident. But I can't let those times and whether or not I have understanding be the sole thing that dictate now how I view and see God. And so it's choosing to hold that openly, knowing that he'll meet me in the pain. He'll let me have it out with him. I'll hash it out. I'll be honest. I can, bring it all to him. And then I don't know how else to explain it other than I've experienced the absolute brokenness, and God still meets me there. And there's a peace that comes. And it doesn't solve it. Like I said, it doesn't answer my questions. It doesn't take away the hurt or grief I carry about things. But there's just something that happens there because of God's goodness that allows me to continue to trust. And I think if we pursue that in an honest way, God will be faithful in meeting us there, regardless of the skepticism or the doubt or the hurt that comes from prayer or unanswered prayers.
Yeah, well, that's super helpful and super hopeful, Becky. Thank you. I think a lot of people needed to hear that today. What an encouragement today to stay engaged and persistent, even in what you said, perceived silence, even in the midst of what feels like God is not there for you. And so I'm just so glad that you were here. And I want to know how we can pray for you. Put a comment there, write us an email. I'll put my email address right here. Just send us an email or click on the request prayer button on our Church Online platform. We'd love to stand with you and then rejoice with you when God answers prayer, and stand with you when you are in the waiting as well. So let's continue to lean into Jesus as Becky encouraged us to do. And I hope to see you next time.